Hi, this is Nancy L.T. Hamilton. Welcome back to my studio. Today we're going to do a little weird kind of thing. We're going to show you how to make square flat edges and how to make a square and a perfect square and a perfect rectangle out of metal. It sounds a lot easier than it actually is, and it takes a lot of finesse and a couple of tricks, which I'm going to show you. You lucky thing you. So just hold on and we'll get to it. So, if you have a piece of metal that looks like this, and you need to make this into a beautiful little square, the first thing you have to do, if you don't already have one, is find a nice, perfectly square edge. And actually, go back one step. The first thing you really have to do is flatten this, because you're not going to get accurate measurements. So, take your little mallet on a steel block and flatten it all out like that. The next trick is, now this actually does have one nice straight edge on it, but I'm going to pretend it doesn't, because I do love a good pretend. What you're going to need is a triangle, and it doesn't matter really where you put it, but you might want to put it in a place where you're not going to waste too much metal. And just go ahead and mark out these two lines, two sides here. So theoretically, this is perfect corner of a square or a rectangle at this point. That's pretty easy, isn't it? The hard part comes in cutting it and then having it perfectly cut. So sawing will always end up leaving you with little bumps. I have a visual aid today, like this, and this is magnified greatly. But generally, when you saw, you end up leaving, you have little pits and divots like this. And here's my pen. When you file it or sand it down, most of the time people just take off the tops of the little, whatever, let's call them hummocks. What you need to do when you file is file all the way down to the bottom of the deepest ravine. Sounds like a nature program today. Pretty soon we should have bird sounds in the background. So what I'm going to do is show you a couple techniques on how to get your bumps done if you do use a saw to cut your metal. I'm also going to show you a couple techniques on different techniques to cut your metal. So, one of the three ways that I can think of to cut metal offhand is to use French shop shears. It depends on the thickness of the metal. This is, I think this is 24 gauge. I use these, I think, up to 22 gauge, and they're great for cutting a straight line because they're like scissors, and most of us passed scissors class in kindergarten. So this is still not going to give you a perfect edge. One of the things that happens is you get this kind of wonkiness going on here. So once again, you need to flatten your metal before you move on. The next thing I'm going to show you is the Guillotine Shear and how that works. It's a bigger tool. So this is a Guillotine Shear that I have. This one's the cheapie from Harbor Freight. I can't remember how much it was, maybe 80 bucks. They do make much more accurate guillotines than this. This one makes, it's a little difficult. You have to visually line it up. There's no system to help you do that. It's an eye thing. So what you do is push, you've got a black line on here, you push the metal all the way back into the back of the throat, back here, as far as it'll go, and then I'm going to line the line, excuse me, the line up, must have swallowed a chicken, line up the black line with the edge of the shear here, and then I pull this down, and I get my cut, which actually this time turned out pretty good. So this is going to be pretty much true and clean edge. We won't have to do anything special on it, but with the shears and a sawn edge, we need to do a couple different techniques, so we'll go do that now. This one that I cut with the French shop shear, I obviously flunked scissors in kindergarten, but I did it on purpose. I really did, so that I can show you how to true up the edge on this. Having a file this size is very helpful. Using the little tiny ones just makes this mind-boggling insane. So you can do this freehand, where you put the metal at a 90-degree angle on your file and try to keep it square. and drag it down the face of the file, like so. And what you're going to be checking for are those bumps that I talked about. You want to make sure that the metal is completely evenly scratched. You can really tell, and we're going to have a little close-up of that in a second, so you can really see the difference between a piece that's filed properly and a piece that isn't filed properly. Now, using this method is great. Initially, if your arms wiggle at all or anything like that, you can really throw this off. This angle has to be pretty tight. So I came up with another system, and this is a board. And what I've done is I've got two files of the same thickness, and this is a nice edge right here that's at 90 degrees, and I just push the metal against it and drag it down the file, and that'll guarantee that I'm getting the correct, ooh, nice sound. It's a lot easier doing it on a long edge than it is on the short edge, by the way. Doing it like this is like, sweet. It's a little more difficult. But if you're really having a problem getting your edges trued, this is just one technique that you can use. You can also, if you don't have files, slap some 220 under here, like so. Which one's the edge of what it's working on? And drag it down here. While you're doing this, you want to check your piece, and you want to see where your line is. Like, this is not even at all. I need to drag a little harder on this side than I do on this side. So I'm going to push more weight and kind of lift the other end up and drag it down here. And eventually you will get it so that it's completely even with the black lines. That's your goal here. Another technique is freehand. It's a little more dangerous in the sense that you have to try to exert even pressure, but it's using the vise and the file. The advantage of this is that you can see what's going on the entire time, but what usually happens when people file like this is they put too much pressure on this end and too much on this end, and you end up with rounded edges. So if you're going to do this, think mentally of starting a little over on the edge. And I totally lied to you. I have two more techniques to show you how to get a straight edge, not one. What was I thinking? If you happen to own a Wolf belt sander, this is another sanding technique that you can use to true this edge up. It works similar to the file or the sanding system. Is you need to keep your angle. This needs to be at a 90 degree. And since you are a human, it's very difficult to do. If you had two completely flush, true edges, you could use this bar as a brace. But since, well, actually this is true, so I can do that. I forgot I did it on the guillotine. So you can just run it on here until you get it where it's nice and even up. And then there's the last and one of my favorite tools for making almost precision machine-made flush edges. The only drawback to it is that it's too small. Somebody needs to make a wider one, but I'll show it to you in a second. I'm going to make you wait breathlessly. So this little sucker has the stupidest name. It's called the miter cutting vise. Doesn't cut. It's not a vise. Couldn't do a miter. But they run I think $65 to $175. There's two different kinds that I've seen. There may be more. Obviously, I don't know everything. And the biggest drawback to this perfect tool is that it's only 27 millimeters wide. That's like 2 1/32 of an inch. And it's just too frickin' small, the throat here. So if they made one, anybody listening, 4 to 6 inches wide, I would buy it. So what you need to do is this is one perfect edge, in which we know we have. There is I need a pointer. There is a little bar that comes down on the front and the back. It runs right through the whole piece. This thing is crucial. What you need to do is you need to put the metal in, and this metal, is too thick. Hold on, let me thin this down real fast. Remember, the 27 millimeters is way too small, but you know, it is jewelry and we do work in small stuff. Okay, so you have to push this metal as close as you can get. Well, it has to be all the way butted up on the wall of that little peg thing. And the other deal is you don't want this much metal sticking out. We just want to take a little bit off to square it up. So I'm going to push it in as far as I can without screwing everything up. Okay. See? Ooh. Let's see, is that right? Okay. Now I'm going to tighten this top down and I'm going to check the fit. These are screw knurled nuts. And what I'm looking for is no black line, no gap here at this edge where the peg is and against the metal. And also on this side, you don't want any gap between the metal and that peg. It needs to be completely flush on both sides. If not, it'll be a hair off and your piece won't fit. So you can use this with a vise. I usually put it on my bench pin to do this, but since my bench pin is far, far away, I'm going to just slap it in here. So once you've got this really tightened down, and make sure it's tight and make sure it's fit properly, then you go ahead and take a file. And don't maybe use your best files for this because this steel is so hard. It's amazing. I have used this for several years and I've never scratched it with a file. I use this frequently. Now see, this is a little too high. I should have put it a little lower because it's going to take me 3 hours to do this. Well, not really, but... And what you do, essentially, is file this thing all the way down to it's flush. The metal is flush with the top of the miter. And what you end up with is this beautifully straight edge. Here we have our mitered flush cut, sawn, filed, whatever it's called, metal. And I don't know if you can see, but this metal is almost exactly level now with the surface of the miter cutting vise. So this thing it's just perfect, you know. Sometimes there's a little burr on the edge here that you can just take off with sandpaper or a file. Just make sure you do it like that so you don't mess up your pristine edge. That's a nice edge, kiddies. I love it. Just make a bigger one, manufacturers. So to make a square or a rectangle, you need to have all your sides pretty much right on. So there's two ways to square up your other corners. Basically the same thing we did before with the triangle, where you've got your one square edge now, and you need a nice flat surface like this, and go ahead and use the triangle. I'm doing this backwards, so hold on. And drag your pen up there, and then cut it with whatever method you're going to do, and do the same steps we did where you file it flat or put it in the miter box to get your second one, and repeat all those angles that way. Another way to do it is to use the compass, and since you already have one, as long as you have one straight edge on here, you just set your compass by, let's say you want it to be 3 millimeters wide. You just put your one leg of the compass on here, and these are double pointed. They don't have a pencil on it. They're for scratching the metal. And you put the second one on the 3 like that. Get your straight edge here, and go ahead and drag your compass nice and evenly, preferably along that line. Well, pretend the black line wasn't there, okay? Unfortunately, I ended up doing them both at 3 somehow. It must have been a miracle. So then once again, if you use the compass, let me do one over here so you can see the faint line you're going to be working with. Wait a minute, sorry. I gotta do it down here. I don't want to scratch up my middle block because we got steel on steel. So I don't even know if you can see that line there. it's a really faint line, and it makes it difficult to saw or to cut on there. So you're probably going to end up having to remark it with either a ruler or a triangle with the pen. So just, you know, line up your marker, your ruler on that line and run the pen across it and cut it and file it and get it ready and do the next with the next angle. So what you're going to end up with, if this was all cut out, is here's a square. The way to check to make sure that you've got these things right is to measure from corner to corner, and they should be the same, equidistant, not equidistant, that was a bad word, sorry, same length from that end to this end. And it holds true with rectangles and squares. If this was a box that was this big, the corner to corner measurement should still be exactly the same. If they're not exactly the same, something is off. And that's where you need to go back to your triangle and make sure that you've got truly square edges. You know, place it up against, butt it up against the edge, redraw your lines like if you have to. Let me do one right here. I'm going to twist this a little just to pretend it's off. So sometimes you'll do something like that and go, oh wow, look, I was really off on my corner. So hopefully you won't have to do that too often, but honestly, doing this kind of squaring up is a little futzy, and it takes some practice and it takes a while to get it down, but that's why jewelry costs money, is because it takes time to do this and it takes skill set that you have to eventually build up. So I'm hoping some of these ticks and tips, I am really just blubbling today. I don't even think that's a word, but I hope these help you to get this hard thing to do done. So that's this video for this week or month or whatever it is. And as my mother in the old country says, thanks for watching. Come again, okay? I hope you learned something today. Thanks. This is Nancy L.T. Hamilton signing off.